I want to welcome Dr. G to our town hall on vaccine safety and distribution. We are so grateful that he has joined us. He's kind of a well-known person in town, but I will introduce him anyway. Doctor, I'm going to mess up your last name. So Galiatsatos, is that right?
Perfect. Fantastic.
Okay, that's
Well
just
work,
my
Valerie.
guess. That's great. Okay. So Dr. Galiatsatos is the assistant professor in the Division of Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine at Hopkins, amongst other things. He's also the co-director of Medicine for the Greater Good. And he has been going around doing lots of these sessions for synagogues and for other groups in the local area. And we know there's been considerable interest and a lot of confusion on what's going on with vaccines in our state. So we thought it would be great if we could have him come here and answer some of our questions. So I have a few questions that were sent to me, but I think maybe if we could first start by just asking you for a general state of the vaccine today. Every day it seems to change a little bit, and you probably are a lot more on top of things than any of us are just reading the news.
No, of course. So I want to make sure that so good to see everyone. Also, full disclosure, and I don't want anyone to panic when I say this. Full disclosure.
Oh, and please put yourself on mute if you're not Dr. G. Thank you.
The reason why I'm coming to you live from my office, and I say this lovingly, don't freak out. My mother had some chest pain, so she's currently being evaluated by my colleagues under my office in the emergency room here at Hopkins. I was just with her. She's fine. She's literally inviting everyone in that emergency room to come to Greece this summer if it's able to. So everyone is fine, but that's why I'm coming to you all from my office. And if I have to step away to take a phone call, I'll let you all know. With that said, the other thing that I want to lay out is full recognition that I am 100% up to date with the science, right? Well, 99%. No one's ever 100% sure of anything. So I'm up to date with the science, and I'm happy to answer the science around the vaccines. If you have questions of, I go to the website and I can't schedule a vaccine, I don't know. Like that's the part where my heart breaks. I don't know how to keep up with or even understand the rationale of how vaccines are being distributed. So from that standpoint, I can offer some insight, but it feels like the Hunger Games, if that analogy sinks in well. It's just kind of a free for all at the moment. So definitely can give you all some insight into the vaccines from the science standpoint. That I'm here to help kind of put things, give you guys a lot of ease of your mind and peace of mind as well. And the last comment I'll make before I turn it over to Valerie so we can fire off some questions. Last thing I will say to you all to kind of hopefully set the stage about the science. The most well-studied COVID-19 intervention to date is not hydroxychloroquine. The most, we had about 1,000 patients enrolled in that study, and we followed them for 28 days just to prove it didn't work. It's not the steroids, the dexamethasone trials, a little over 1,500 patients followed for 28 days. It's not remdesivir, a whole new medication, never given out before. Now it's given like water in the hospital, right? And we have no idea what even long-term consequence will happen from it. Its trial included anywhere from 800 to 1,400 people, again, followed for 28 days. It's what we tend to do, 1 month mortality. And then every other medication, even the antibody that President Trump received, 400 people in that study. I say this to compare it to the most well-researched COVID-19 intervention is the vaccines. Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. I don't know that much about Johnson & Johnson at the moment. They haven't released all their data transparently out into the public, but I can give you some insight on the vaccine technology and so forth. But all three of those vaccines recruited between 40 and 50,000 people and followed them for 6 months at a minimum. So more to come, but I'm hoping right off the bat, that begins to give you the peace of mind of recognizing this, the vaccine in of itself, is the most well-researched COVID-19 intervention from both patient recruitment, volume, time duration. And actually, I can even tell you studies here probably predate the virus in of itself about a coronavirus vaccine. So Valerie, with that groundwork, being both son and doctor at the moment for the community, I'm all yours. Go for it.
Great. My first question is, what is the difference between the various vaccines?
Ooh, great question. So overall, vaccines, to me, here's an analogy. Think of transportation. Someone's like, hey, let's go to Washington, D.C. today. You could take a car, you could take a train, you could take a helicopter, you could even take a boat in theory, right? They all get you to the same outcome. So all the vaccines will still try to get you the same outcome. The outcome of a vaccine is always to give you what we fancily call sterile immunity, meaning if you get the infection, you won't get the disease. If you get SARS-CoV-2, you won't develop life-threatening COVID-19. So all the vaccines get us that endpoint. That's the goal. How do we get there? Let's go over a little bit of the technology. The two FDA-approved ones at the moment, approved them for emergency use, is Moderna and Pfizer. The way they work, really clever. Like if there's any science nerds on this call, this one's exciting, right? The way they work is we literally just grab the DNA or genetic codes from RNA, some nucleic acids, the building blocks of life. We arrange them, kind of like Scrabble letters, to be able to create a code that if I inject it in you, it will make that actual protein. That resembles what's on the coronavirus. That's like, the reason why I say this is really cool is because this is literally the groundbreaking technology that's going to create the vaccines in the future for HIV to the common cold. They're all going to be the genetic base. It's just easy to do, easy to make. And this is why they crossed the finish line way before everyone else and are able to pump out millions, right, in the sheer volume. It's just really easy and efficient to make. And we've been investing in genetic-based vaccines for 2 decades now. I say this because there's people walking around who've gotten the vaccine for SARS-CoV, that coronavirus back in 2003, that shares 70% genetic similarity with SARS-CoV-2. There are people that received that vaccine in research laboratories, and they're still doing fine. But that, all the new public health crisis we get them from infections, we're going to create vaccines first with this. I promise you, it's just a really efficient mechanism. Anyway, Pfizer and Moderna both use that. What's the big difference between them? It's like trying to figure out the difference between a Chevy and a Ford. Not much. If you're calorie conscious, get Moderna. It's a little less sugar that wraps around it. You save about 0.000, there's 401 calories. There you go. That's why it's a little bit more stable at less cold temperature, so it's easier to store. Pfizer has a little bit more lipids, but honestly, they're both the same. It's just the wrapping, the delivery is a little different. Now, Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, those use the same technology as well, a little bit of differences. And this one's a little bit an older version of vaccine technology. What they do is they give you a virus that does nothing to human beings, right? It technically comes from chimpanzees. It's an adenovirus. We've used this constantly in other capacities. Many times, cancer treatments use this virus, right? It does no harm to human beings. And in that virus, we give it the spike protein found in coronavirus in a manner where literally if you inject it into us, it presents the spike protein kind of like how Simba is presented in the Lion King, right? When you hold the little cub out, that's what it does. Holds it up, our bodies find it and reproduces it. Reproduces the antibodies. Those are the two technologies at the moment that I'm going to emphasize because Moderna and Pfizer, that's what they use, versus AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. Those are the 4 companies that you are likely to see being publicly available in the US by the summer of 2021. So those are the ones that I'll emphasize. Moderna and Pfizer, technology that's 2 decades old, but for the first time used in public. Right, so I will emphasize that. AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson's technology has been used in vaccines before, really gets its claim to fame through cancer treatments and genetic treatments, because you can use this kind of viral vector, is what we call it, to kill off cancer cells and so forth. So it's got a lot more years of research behind it, but it's vaccines probably the 3rd most common usage for it. Genetic reasons and cancer reasons are the other ones. So hopefully, Valerie, if I ramble too much, you can be like, time out, Dr. G, come on. No, it's just, let's
No,
bring
I
it back.
think I
This
think
is
you're doing
exciting.
great.
Perfect.
How will the new variants impact the effectiveness of the vaccine? Will
Great.
the vaccine still work, or will updated vaccines be necessary, or boosters, I guess?
That's a great question. So to some extent, the answer is we think they will, but like any good scientist and physician, that hypothesis needs to be confirmed. With that said, let me just give you an understanding of what variances mean, right? Because if you all have this basic knowledge, you may already have it, but don't want to make assumptions. I'm hoping it gives you a little bit more, puts your mind to ease. Variances from mutations happen all the time. Technically, what a virologist calls a mutation, an obstetrician, an OB doctor calls children. Like, you all are technically mutants from your parents. Mutations just genetically just mean you're still the same species, you're just genetically different. So if you think it in that context, then you can say, well, then biologically everything's a mutant. The offspring are always mutations. Yeah, they always are. Every mutation, right? The SARS-CoV-2 that I get is mutated when it leaves me. That's just, it's part of the biology, right? Just like humans create offspring, that's offspring, but they're technically mutants, they're variances. The reason when I say that is because knowing that mutations are just part of the biology of the virus, that should key to you that mutations happen then all the time. Every time it spreads, it mutates. With SARS-CoV-2, a positive for us is that its mutations, 99.999% of the time, the mutations will do nothing. They'll be nothing. They just help us out really for contact genetic testing, meaning I can trace back to the origins of where this SARS-CoV-2 potentially came from. However, it can mutate into a way where maybe you can transmit it faster. Maybe it may cause more severe COVID-19. It's rare. One thing to know about SARS-CoV-2 is the probability of it ever mutating into something like that was always low. What keeps it low is because it has its genetic material is in just one strand. Versus the flu, its genetic material is chopped up, multiple strands. So multiple strands, multiple opportunities to mutate into something more devious. I say this because the reason why we're seeing these more concerning mutations is because we've allowed this thing to kind of continue growing and growing and growing. So eventually, Mother Nature was going to mutate in a way that raised our concerns. Now, so mutations are part of the biology of the virus, happen all the time. The longer you allow this virus to continue going around, spreading, yeah, it's going to mutate into things that really get our blood pressures boiling and our hearts racing a little bit. But going back to Valerie's first question, will this impact the vaccines? The thing is, we don't believe so. And let me tell you why. As I just said, it mutates all the time. That means we know that. We know that. That means when I create a vaccine, I'm aware that the virus at that moment is going to be very different by the time this vaccine comes out. Every virologist knows that. Every vaccine expert knows that. So that's why we try to pick the one thing that rarely changes. And that's why we chose the spike protein. That's why we also got this vaccine so darn quickly. It's because we had it for SARS-CoV. We just never needed it publicly because the hygienic interventions work. Then we made it for MERS-CoV, just never needed it publicly because the hygienic interventions stopped it, right? But both of them went into human trials in the laboratory. They just never went public. We didn't need it. We stopped it with physical distancing, face mask, and hand hygiene. With this one, we needed to go public. So here we are. And we just did one slight tweak and we got a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine built up on the 17 years worth of data for the other ones. So the answer to your question, Valerie, is we don't suspect it. However, we're scientists. We have that hypothesis. We'll prove it. And that's what we're doing in real time. And to some extent, Moderna's already been doing it and is finding, hey, this works. On a side note, this is why we still can't get an HIV vaccine. That darn bugger, its mutations, like it has 3 very simple parts and they constantly change so much that whatever vaccine you create doesn't work on ones, that go into someone else. So yeah, SARS-CoV-2, we will be able to, I'm very confident the vaccine should be fine against the variances. However, like I said, we're going to prove it. Back to you, Valerie.
Thank you. All right. One question I have is, I have a number of very specific questions about specific medical conditions. I do want to ask about children because many of us have kids under the age of 18 or 16, and we're wondering about going back to school, unvaccinated teachers, kids that haven't been vaccinated, and how safe is this, and when will kids be able to get the vaccine?
Yeah, so right now the two FDA approved products are for Pfizer 16 and older, Moderna's 18 and older. Johnson & Johnson, 18 and older. Adults, when we recruit adults, we're just like, all right, 18 until 90, one lump sum of people physiologically the same after the age of 18. Pediatric vaccine trials take longer. There's a lot more red tape. And it's not, let's recruit 0 to 16. It's 0 to 2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, 9 through 10, 11. I mean, these are like, they cut them off frequently. Pfizer is the only one that I know that just finished recruiting for 13 through 15-year-olds, 1,000 patients. What we're going to get 0 to 2, I think we're going to approve it based on just 100 patients. So I see this because, yeah, pediatric vaccines for the entire spectrum of age probably won't be until 2022. For school-age children, you know, second graders and more, second graders are 10 years old, we'll probably have it at the end of the summer. So I say that because if we want to go back to school safely, our children still have to practice those hygienic interventions. They have to do what they can to not catch the virus in the community, and therefore not bring it into the schools, right? I make this one point very clear all the time. The best way to not spread the virus in the school is to not bring the virus into the school. So everyone still has to practice hygienic interventions. Like, we cannot stop those. And they work, right? New Zealand has 0 cases. Finland, 0, you know, well, low. I think it's under like 10 cases. They work. They just were very compliant, right? Every virologist has said, this pandemic can end anywhere if 95% of the community complies for 4 weeks with these hygienic interventions. Why? Because the virus needs to spread. If the virus doesn't spread, it dies off. So my 2 cents on school reopenings, what I would love, yeah, I'd love every teacher to get vaccinated before she walks in. These are Ponegie's, Dr. G's comments. I'd love for every teacher, that way they can feel a sense of security. However, we do not stop the hygienic interventions. We don't stop them. Because right off the bat, I told you, these vaccines, their intention is sterile immunity, preventing disease. What we don't know is if you catch the virus and you're vaccinated, could you still transmit it? There's reasons to suspect yes, and there's reasons to suspect no. Transmission of virus, no one studies that unless a significant population gets vaccinated, right, to achieve what's called herd immunity. Herd immunity stops it. Why? Because if I'm vaccinated, the virus comes in me, it's like, whoa, 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 he's got antibodies. Can't do my thing, can't replicate. Let me leap into Valerie. And Valerie's vaccinated, can't do it either. Then it jumps into Lori. Essentially, the virus just dies off because it realizes it can't replicate anywhere. That's herd immunity. That's only achieved if enough people are vaccinated. So I do think schools can open safely if they're well-resourced to keep our kids safe, physically distanced. Ideally, to be really great for teachers to be vaccinated so they feel some level of comfort. Is it a necessity? I think it depends. This is subjective. I would say it should be. That's my 2 cents. You're interacting with a lot of people. I'm a physician. I interact with a lot of people. It gives me the peace of mind on my end. So those are the 2 things. In addition to the third one, community rates should be low. So community rates are low, usually means your hospitals are not full. Usually means if, you know, something horrible happens to a child back at school with an asthma attack, there's going to be an opening in a hospital to take care of them where they don't have to go hours away to find care. That's my 2 cents about school reopenings. I'm happy to weigh in on it. There's a lot of subjectivity. You know, people highlight the CDC study of showing schools are not super spreading events. My only asterisk to that is those schools that they studied were incredibly well-funded and well-resourced. And I've seen those schools through those studies. I mean, these kids were sitting in like phone booths. So, you know, it's a little bit of a biased election. So back to you, Valerie. I think I probably answered a ton of questions with that because I rambled.
Yeah,
So
no, it was very helpful. Okay. So you might have already touched on this, but how can you be contagious after receiving the vaccine? That sounds like what you just said about whether you're still carrying it or
Yep.
transmitting it.
So vaccines are always, their job is always to prevent disease. Like, let me give you an example. Hepatitis B vaccines, right? Those are the ones you have to go for 3 shots. You can still pass on Hep B, right? You can spread it. You just won't ever get the disease. It's one of my favorite examples. Vaccines' job is not to stop spread. Its job is to prevent disease from happening. So that should imply, especially for airborne viruses, that if it comes in me, all it means is that it just can't infect my cells. My cells have antibodies, well prepared, well trained, saying, nope, I recognize you, stay away. Just may not kill them, right? So the virus could just sit there hanging out on the cell, waiting for you to blow it out and have someone else inhale it. That's why we think there's a plausibility that this can be continued to be spread, mainly because where this virus can mutate and hang out in the back of our nose and throat doesn't really infect those cells really well, but it can stay there as you breathe it out very nicely. So we do think there's a strong probability that you could spread it. With that said, like I was telling Valerie earlier, we got to test it. We're testing it in real time. But every physician, every scientist always makes the note that the vaccines are never meant to prevent transmission. They're always meant to prevent disease. To stop transmission, you need a lot of people to have those antibodies, right? The memory, because after that, yeah, the virus can't find somewhere to infect, to live, procreate, and so forth. So Valerie, back to you, my friend.
Okay. If you get a mild case of COVID after getting the vaccine, can you still suffer long-range side effects involving the heart and lungs?
This is what I love doing these town hall meetings, because you guys ask amazing questions that science isn't there for. So the answer is we don't know, right? Keep in mind, the vaccines were just publicly available December and January. So getting people who have been vaccinated and got mild case of COVID, those studies are actively happening. And in addition, keep in mind, for having long-term consequences, meaning 3 to 6 months, we're not even 3 months publicly available with COVID. Those patients who are in the research trial, the 44,000, their data doesn't get released until 6 months later. So the answer is, it's a good question. It's being well researched at the moment. I can tell you, being one of the faculty members running the post-COVID-19 clinic, the majority of patients, the only mild symptom, and I say mild in the context of not life-threatening, may impact quality of life, but not life-threatening, is the loss of smell and taste. That can take about 6 months. So I'm not sure if vaccine will protect that or not. So my 2 cents is, I don't think you'll have those long-term consequences that are really quality of life robbing. Usually you need a good, moderate version of COVID-19 to develop that. But as I said, I'm giving you my biological hypothesis. Our data will hopefully show that, but that data won't come out really until June-ish. With that said, I'm going to take this moment to emphasize getting the vaccine should be, and I apologize if this is a violent image, but getting the vaccine should make you feel like wearing a bulletproof vest. Bullets are still flying around, all right? They're still out there, meaning you still need to do those hygienic interventions, right? Because all these vaccines are meant to do is prevent serious life-threatening disease. You could get mild cases. Yeah, I mean, they weren't intended to prevent that. So that's just an FYI.
Okay. Will any medications interfere with the effectiveness of the vaccine?
Yes. So, well, let me answer that. So this vaccine for younger individuals, for people 50 and 18 to 50, no subjectivity there, objective numbers, 18 to 50, you're likely going to feel miserable. You will. You're going to feel some aches and chills. If you need to take a physician approved, meaning your doc's okay with you taking a Tylenol or an ibuprofen to mitigate these symptoms, that's reasonable. The information flying around, don't take ibuprofen or this, like that, from my standpoint, it's just, I have no idea how it made its way into the public. Take something if you need to feel better. However, if you are someone for 51 and older, I say this lovingly as well, so this amazing group, you're probably not going to feel side effects. You're not, I say this because in the adverse events listed, and adverse events just means I had some chills and so forth, the older population didn't feel them, right? They reported them at a very low rate. I say this because when the vaccine really, especially Pfizer and Moderna, every vaccine wants to help the populations being ravaged in real time. Who is that? What's minorities, low socioeconomic status, and elderly. So they made this as potent as it could for those groups, specifically for elderly. Moderna and Pfizer are 100% effective in preventing severe COVID-19 for 70 and older. For everyone else, it's about 94, 95%. So I say this because the older population in the reports reported a really low frequency of side effects of like feeling bad. Younger, we felt miserable. I felt miserable. My wife called me out. She's like, why are you wearing a jacket going to bed? I was like, I'm got chills. Now, are there any other medications? This, I would really strongly talk to your doctor about this. Like if you have, say, if you're taking a medication that weakens your immune system, say you have lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, talk to your rheumatologist. The American Academy of Rheumatology has put out a statement. And so there are physicians who say, let's stop your Imuron, your autoimmune medication for a period, get the vaccine, wait for 2 weeks, and then we restart it. So and same thing with oncology. There's a great, the American Academy of Oncology or Society of Oncology for the cancer groups, they put out very specific recommendations as well. So if you have a condition where you are taking something that is interacting with your immune system, 100% talk to your physician and see if you should stop that medication, you should wait, or what you should do. So I'd say this, Valerie, in order to give more medical specific things should be tailored to your condition and to your to your physician who's managing that. More broad things like ibuprofen or Tylenol, potentially that's where the question was going to. If you need to take them because you feel miserable, take them, don't feel miserable. So back to you, Valerie.
All right, so a couple of these might be too specific in a way. If one is on blood thinners, should they not be taken prior to receiving a vaccine?
You can take the blood thinner and get the vaccine. That's fine. I mean, yeah, the jab of the needle may result in a little bit longer bleeding there, but you can get it.
Okay. Let's see. In terms of, one person shared about the lack of long-term study of this vaccine for an autoimmune compromised individual. Could the vaccine cause unexpected problems long-term that would be worse than getting COVID?
We don't know, right? I mean that we don't know. The coronavirus vaccines are about 17 years past. They work greatly, and those people still do well. The question you ask is very direct, very specific. To date, we don't have any insight of any vaccines that have resulted in significant consequences years or decades later that would outweigh the benefit of initially getting it to prevent disease in real time. We don't have that, we don't have any of those kind of reports to indicate one way or the other to say, hey, caution, 2 decades later, the Tdap or the polio vaccine may cause harm. Even smallpox, right? We eradicated in May 8th, 1980. Many people are walking around, 50 years later with a smallpox vaccine in them, which is, by the way, one of the scarier vaccines to have gotten, right? We put in there live viruses, right? They're doing fine. People are walking around doing okay. There is always going to be a time in every situation that history will tell us that a lot of is expected of us with a little information. I get it. However, I don't think this vaccine is one of those instances. We have 6 months worth of data for a lot of individuals, 120,000 really through 3 vaccine groups. To make general comments on that, I think is incredibly reasonable. And we've made comments on much less data. I feel very confident in the sense of, I don't think a long-term consequence will develop. Why can I say that? there's that interaction to spark that level in the immune system. I have never seen kind of a consequence. What I have seen is having COVID, because it parallels a lot of some similar biologies with these other coronaviruses in the past, you're likely to see dire consequences from that years later. We know that, right? The biology of those viruses can interact years later. That frightened me. Always remember, vaccines is one of the most genuine things human beings have created to allow us to live without ever having to suffer the consequence of the disease, right? Going back to 1797 with Edward Jenner, who came up with the name vaccine. It just means cow in Latin, if you were wondering. So it's a great question you ask. I'm extrapolating because we don't have those long-term consequences. But to date, there aren't other vaccines that have resulted in that would say the initial benefit is outweighed for decades later. So I don't have that sense that we'll have that kind of outcome with this. I do think the benefit now will transcend into the future.
Would the mRNA ultimately be a better option for some people than the traditional vaccine, which Johnson & Johnson is working on? Like you talked about the two technologies.
Yeah, so I would say get the vaccine that's going to be readily available for your community. Like the purchase of these vaccines is out of everyone's hands, it's out of my hands. Like I can't prescribe it saying like, I want to give you this blood pressure med versus that. Like I don't have that authority, right? I'm at the mercy of who Hopkins gets, who the state of Maryland gets. Johnson & Johnson's is great. It is on par with your traditional vaccine outcomes. Moderna and Pfizer just got, I mean, that's extra credit. Like seeing a vaccine efficacy in the 90 percentile is almost unheard of. You have to go back years. The reason why they got that good, I'm telling you, it is because of the technology allowing it to be that efficacious. Johnson & Johnson, it's got, and AstraZeneca's, the data that they submitted to the UK and to India, that's your traditional vaccine, getting 80% efficacy against severe life-threatening disease. That's what we usually are expecting, and that's what we usually rely on. So what I would say is Johnson & Johnson, in my opinion, is a good tool and an appropriate tool. And for people who feel like I just don't have the time to go get a second one, get Johnson & Johnson. Like I'm already suspecting like we'll probably use it a lot in our homeless population because it's hard to track them down to come back for a second shot. However, if you have the opportunity to get the 2-shot dose, you overheard Dr. G said 70 and older, it's 100% effective. Yeah, if you're given that, if you're given options, by all means, take the one that's, in the 90 percentile. That's no one's going to knock you for that. But if you're just have Johnson & Johnson, don't feel defeated. Take it. I would take that if that was given to me. So that's my 2 cents. I say this because we may not have that opportunity to have this as a buffet of choices. We're at the mercy of what these, what our state can get us, what the hospitals will distribute, and so forth.
All right, I'm going to go into a couple of questions that have come in the chat. Why is, okay, this might, I don't know if you can answer this because this might have more to do with distribution. Why isn't there an effort to allow our oldest citizens who have still not had a first vaccine, who are the most vulnerable or among the most vulnerable, to have at least one shot? In other words, why wasn't that a given of those over 70 perhaps to get those people vaccinated first?
I share in your same frustration. My dad's 80. He got Moderna first. He's going to get a second one next week. My mom's 74. I can't find anywhere. I called the president of Bayview. Him and I are good friends. He's like, try to find somewhere else. We don't have any more. We have enough to do second shots. Called downtown Hopkins. This is who I'm employed by. He told me the same thing. I booked my mom an appointment in Hagerstown. It's not a community I like to go to, but that's where I'm going March 5th, unless we can find it sooner. And I booked that, by the way, in January, and I still go to the website over and over again. I love doing these town halls because I love hearing these concerns because trust me, I go back and I fire it off to plenty of people. Did another town hall, got the same concerns. Yeah, I'm with you. It incredibly infuriates me. I'm being incredibly professional for you all and biting my tongue, but science got us here. We have it. We're ready to go. You know, not being able to have it in our state to pump it out, I apologize. Like it's out of my hands, and it infuriates me as well.
Can you tell us how or what should a transplant patient do to get the vaccine? I don't know if.
Yeah, so it depends on the type of transplant. If we're talking about bone marrow, usually just depends on how long you've had the bone marrow. If we're talking about an organ transplant, then talk with your organ transplant team. In our, like, I'm a lung doctor and I work a lot with lung transplant patients. They can get the vaccine. Kidney, perfect. So, Mr. Jerry, oh, that's my dad's name too. Talk to your transplant team for two reasons. One is to make sure that you're not, for instance, going through active rejection, right? No one would recommend the vaccine at that moment. Two, if it's anything like lungs, every kind of year or so, there's a time milestone that a bit of the medications may change. We may be able to peel things off just because we know in the first couple of years, we're worried about this virus potentially attacking it that lives in us and so forth. So that's it. I would just call your transplant team, say, hey, am I good to go get this vaccine? For people with an organ transplant for several years, it's usually good to go. Unless you're in active rejection, then they tell you probably hold off. So that's my 2 cents. It's kind of like that person who asked about medications. You really should touch base with your team. We really do allow almost anyone to get this vaccine. There are subgroups that we will say probably hold off. Someone with an organ transplant, an active rejection, we would say you probably should hold off, just because we're giving you a lot of immune compromising drugs that would really mitigate the strength of the vaccine at the time that you would get it. So yeah, that's it. Mr. Jerry, thank you for sharing. I would just strongly encourage hopefully the kidney transplant teams, like the lung team, you can call them anytime and they're like, oh yeah, let's talk. It's 2 a.m. I'm playing bridge. Let's do it. Maybe a little mahjong.
Okay. I don't know if you can answer this, but how long do the antibodies last following COVID-19? Do we know that yet?
So if you get COVID-19, how long do they last? Yes, I love this question. So right off the bat, you guys are all recognizing that COVID-19 is a spectrum, right? It's a disease. Some people get very mild cases. Bit of a runny nose, cough, sneeze, that's about it. Others get life-threatening disease. You're in my intensive care unit fighting for your life. I say this because that variability in disease translates into variability into antibodies. Our suspicion is the mild cases, maybe a week, maybe a month. Severe cases, life-threatening, maybe 90 days, and then they go away. So that's what we suspect. Coronaviruses are very insidious because their antibodies are never meant to be permanent, even if you have life-threatening disease. Now, with that said, if you've heard like, oh, I had COVID, I was told to wait 2 weeks or 90 days, this is what I'll say. The reason why that was said is because of an active vaccine shortage that we are all clearly witnessing. So if you've had moderate to severe COVID, yeah, we'll tell you 90 days because we think you have antibodies, and that'll last you for 90 days until you get the vaccine accessible for you. But like one of my patients called me, he's at a skilled nursing facility after leaving the hospital. He's like, I'm being offered the vaccine, but don't have to wait. I'm like, no, get it. If it's actively being offered to you, get the vaccine, put it in your arm so you can get it in real time. Anyway, so yeah, so antibody presence can last, a week, several months. It's hard to say. And this is why, again, going back to kind of the beauty of the technology of vaccines, they get studied in 40,000 plus patients each time we create it, because we don't want to, when we say we wanted to make it work, we want the same immune response every time we give it. Not a week one, not one for a week, not one for a month. We want everyone to have antibodies for a minimum of 6 months. So your phase 1 and phase 2 trials, before they go to phase 3 with a large arm, 40,000 people, that's what we're looking for. We're trying to manipulate the vaccine dose particle. We're trying to, it's like cooking, right? It's like cooking. It's like, let me taste that matzo ball soup. Is it perfect? A little bit more salt, less salt. That's what we're trying to do to perfect it so everyone gets the same outcome all the time. Vaccines do that. It takes away the conversation of, well, how good was your immune system? No. If you got a vaccine, you know what the response is. It's uniform. Back to you, Valerie.
I see very few children wearing masks, young children. Why are children permitted to be out and about without having to wear masks? Is it because a child's immune system is considered better or stronger than an adult?
I mean, I know the CDC says like 2 and younger, and that's just because it's almost impossible for a 2-year-old to wear, like to comply with a mask. But otherwise, no, kids should wear, I mean, the CDC recommends wear masks. So if you see kids out and about not wearing a mask, I mean, if you feel comfortable enough, you're always welcome to ask. I wouldn't pull them aside and in judgmental tone be like, why are you not wearing a mask? But no, the CDC recommends 3 and older face mask. Now, if these kids are playing with one another in a group that they live together, they're podded together, for instance, yeah, maybe they feel like, hey, like for instance, I don't wear a face mask around my daughter when we're in the house. So I'm giving you the general recommendation. What you see individually, I can't speak to that. No, we want to emphasize, like going back to the school conversation, we want to wear face masks. Because kids don't get sick, but kids transmit.
Okay. Is factor 5 considered a comorbidity? And are people with this at a higher risk for getting and dying from COVID?
So I feel like if you talk to a blood doctor, they'll tell you yes. So factor 5 to some extent too is also a heterogeneous disease. Some people have it, nothing's ever complicated them in life. Some people have it and they've been suffering with, hematological issues, blood clots and so forth. So what I would say is if you've ever developed a blood clot because of it, yeah, to me, you're high risk category. The reason being SARS-CoV-2 clots a lot. So if you have a predisposition for clotting, yeah, you're high risk. So that would be my 2 cents. So if you have that, pre-existing condition, call the doctor who's caring for you. It might be a blood doctor, and just let them know, like, hey, if I need a piece of paper, will you write that for me when I show up to get a vaccine? I say this because depending if some of you go to like Pennsylvania, they need to see a piece of paper saying you have a pre-existing condition signed off by a doctor. So just an FYI.
We have one person has a severe allergy to corn. She was told that there is sucrose in the vaccine that is derived from corn. Do you know what the inactive ingredients in the vaccine are?
Yeah, so Linda also wrote, you can find the ingredients online. So this is what I would say. Allergies in of themselves as well are complex. And even, if you carry around, like the patients that I'm most concerned about are those who actively carry epi shots, epinephrine with them at all times. Like if you have such bad allergies to even one thing that's life-threatening, right? And you will walk around with the antidote to save your life, 100% talk to your doctor if I should get it. They probably will say, yes, you just get monitored, right? My practice is in the asthma and allergy building. A lot of patients with really bad asthma have really bad allergies. I just gave a shot to a patient back in February, so early January, right? Whenever January happened, the next category, this patient was 80, he carries around an EpiPen, took him in, we gave him, he got the shot, we monitored for an hour, and then he left. He did okay. So if you carry around an active epinephrine pen, 100% talk to your doctor. If you have bad allergies, still talk to them. You probably will still approve you, right? Because, we can mitigate the allergic reaction. We have ways to do that. We have ways that we will save your life if something horrible happens in a sense of an anaphylactic reaction. So just, again, a lot of my answers, I apologize, are going to be talk to your doctor because, again, they know your health better than I do. And I don't want you guys to get the impression of general comments being specific for you if you have very specific conditions. So just make sure that you run them by your doctor.
How long is someone protected once they receive, I guess, both doses of the vaccine, of one of the mRNA vaccines?
So every vaccine to be cleared needs to follow the phase 3 people for 6 months to make sure that you have an antibody for 6 months. Now, it's a conversation of probability. My analogy here, I hope this one is enjoyed. If you have a Lamar Jackson as your quarterback in the Ravens, the probability is you're likely to do well. It's not a guarantee, but it's a high probability that you'll have a successful year. Same thing with vaccine. If you can form an antibody that's effective at the 6-month mark, not just present, it's actually, it can do its job, it's a functional antibody, then every immunologist, doctors that study the immune system will tell you high likelihood you'll have it for the foreseeable future. So that's why we have that 6-month mark cut off.
Randall, you might have to help me because I'm not 100% sure I understand your question. I heard today that if you get the vaccine, once 90 days after your immunity is at full level, I'm a little confused. Randall, can you explain your question?
Sure. Sorry for being confusing. I heard today that basically 90 days after you're fully sort of 2 weeks after the second vaccine, and then not plus 90 days, that beyond that point, if you're exposed to somebody with COVID, you need to get basically quarantined. Or is there a concern that the antibodies wane after 90 days? Is that what that is stemming from?
Everyone's still, right. So when you get the vaccine, you will always get sterile immunity. Sterile immunity just means you won't develop disease. There's plausibility that still means you may transmit it. So even if you get the vaccine, you will still have to follow the hygienic interventions of quarantining and isolating and so forth. Well, not isolating. Isolating means, well, you might if you get a mild case. We still have to follow these because we have to prove, which we're doing, but that proof may not come out until summer, maybe even early fall, of can we stop transmission with the vaccine? We don't know. So everyone still has to follow the hygienic interventions because, like I said, the vaccine just gives you a bulletproof vest. Bullets are still flying around, right? So that means you have to still take those proper precautions because you won't die, it won't get you in the heart or lungs, right? But the bullet will skin your arms and so forth. Can't make the analogy bend towards a contagious part of it. But yeah, so you still have to quarantine, you still have to follow those hygienic interventions because the fear is you went flying, you went somewhere and you came back, you're like, well, I've gotten vaccinated. Yeah, but you may still transmit this virus to someone else. There's strong plausibility to suspect that.
But is there any magic to the 90-day mark, or that's just any time after you have the vaccine?
It's anytime.
Okay. Thank you.
No, thank you, Russell. By the way, Sharon, the fact that you carry an EpiPen, bless your hearts, the fact that you guys are willing to share some medical information, you 100% should be the person who calls your whoever manages your allergies and say, I'd like to not get COVID, I'd like to get the vaccine. Where should I go where I know I'm going to be monitored if I have an allergic reaction? You're the type of person that should enforce it in that fashion. Back to you, Valerie.
Okay. All right. Is it likely that we will need to get a booster vaccine like a year from now? That I think I've heard that in connection to the more transmissible variants.
Valerie, ask that question one more time. I apologize.
That's totally fine.
My
Is it likely that we'll need to get a booster after like a year because of the more transmissible variants?
So the answer is we don't know. There's reasons to suspect no, right? I already told you that it's mutating, does it constantly. But these mutations, while they sound scary, and I'm not taking away the fear, but single-stranded viruses, they mutate really slowly compared to the flu, which its genetic material has been chopped up, right? It just means there's more strands for a mutation to occur. However, so there's one train of thought to say probably not, but then there's another train of thought that says probably yes. And this is just the big property of a coronavirus. It's a zoonotic virus. Zoonotic implied that it started an animal, came to us. So it could find an animal reservoir to hide out again and then reemerge later. So the answer is we don't know. And the answer is we're actively study that in real time to see if that occurs. So these are I love these questions, and please understand if I don't know, I'm gonna be very transparent so you guys understand we're actively trying to find out those answers in real time.
you think that we'll be getting coronavirus vaccine or COVID-19 vaccines once a year, like the flu shot?
Yeah, I think that's what I was answering. Yes.
Oh,
Like,
I'm sorry. I think
yeah, no worries. Valerie, you are like,
I think
so there's
think I
reasons
got
to suspect
confused.
no, because these mutations aren't massively different. And there's also reasons to suspect yes, because it's a zoonotic virus. So it could always go back into a different animal and actually mutate to a different species and emerge. So the answer is a little bit of yes and no. But when science doesn't know, we find out. Science is like, oh, God, and please, I hope everyone enjoys this and know it's said lovingly. I had a Jewish mother-in-law. Science is like a Jewish mother-in-law. We nag until we get the answer, and that's what we'll do. Hopefully you guys love that. Like I say,
I won't tell my mother-in-law that joke. Okay, so I love that joke, but my mother-in-law would be mad at me. So, question though, how and when do you foresee the pandemic will end?
I'm going to give you the
maybe
same answer.
Before that, when and if will we be able to stop wearing masks?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I'm going to give you the same answer that I give a fifth grader that we teach in these COVID classes. Finland, Singapore, Taiwan, Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia have all shown us, if you comply strictly, 95% of the community complies strictly with stay-at-home policies, which are essentially physical distancing, face mask in public, and precise hand hygiene, this can end in about 4 weeks. New Zealand, the Prime Minister just put a great video, no cases, we're all partying, having fun, living life. Yeah, hygienic interventions stop 2 other coronaviruses. They can do it. Can the vaccine accomplish that for us? It can, but right now we've only had 3% of Americans vaccinated, where we're talking about we need 80%. And these vaccines have been around since December. So my answer to you all is this is hard. It's not like, Valerie could be doing all the right things. Mr. Ralph and Miss Phyllis could be doing all the right things. But if someone else isn't, then this perpetuates and continues. So, so my 2 cents is if we get 80% of the community vaccinated, yeah, we end. This ends. If 95% or more comply for about 4 weeks, we also put this to rest. I don't know how feasible any of those are in the foreseeable future. So my suspicion is we'll probably have some level of a return to normalcy, whatever that may look like, probably by Rosh Hashanah. That's my thought. Passover will still probably look a lot like last year, honestly.
Yeah. Does anybody have any more questions? Because I have read everything that is in the chat.
And if not, we can do this again. Every time a new vaccine comes out, we get, honestly, Valerie, look, I'm here for you all. I don't know if you guys know, like every time I tell my father-in-law that I'm going to speak with Beth Israel, he reminds me that his dad, William Freelander, was part of the founding members of Beth Israel. So I feel strongly connected to this community. So I'm happy to come back as frequently as you all would like to have these conversations.
Are you open to us asking if I were to share like a couple questions on email on occasion?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Email me. Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to know because I don't want to like pass out your email and
I'll do it for you.
Email's
going in the chat box. Like we're human beings. Like happy to help.
Okay.
No worries. Just know if you email Dr. G, it might take me like 48 hours to get back to you. Just FYI. If you're okay with that, email me. If you email me and you're like 10 minutes later, like, why hasn't he responded? I love you all. Just you're usually like one of like 100 people emailing me an hour. I say that lovingly, but Valerie, share emails, so forth.
Sue Rabin went to school with Sharon, my
mother-in-law.
She was wonderful.
Yes, from I think elementary school on in college. She was one, and your wife went to the school where I worked for many years.